All right, our last speaker of the morning is Melissa Wilson. She's an associate professor at the U as well, and her research program focuses on evaluating manure handling techniques to reduce impacts on water quality, as well as filling knowledge gaps about nutrient cycling as farm practices and technologies change. So welcome.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to hear so many questions on manure because that's what I'm going to talk about. Also, realize that I'm the person standing between you and lunch, and I'm going to be talking about poop, so that's never fun. But I'm going to be talking about turning poop into sweet stuff, so maybe that is appropriate. So in this study, I'm going to be talking about liquid separated dairy manure and a sugar beet rotation. I know down here in southern Minnesota, there's not as many sugar beets grown here, but maybe you are from the sugar beet growing region. But also, I'm going to talk about corn and soybean too. So hopefully, I'll have some relevance to everyone in the room. So, why are we doing this study? One of the big things going on is that there's a lot of large dairies moving into northwestern Minnesota into the sugar beet growing region. We had the Dolly Mount Dairy in 2017, the Campbell Dairy in 2018. Both had 7,000 or more cattle. In 2020, we had the North Ottawa Dairy move in, which was 11,000 cattle. And in 2022, we had the Waukon Dairy, which is 10,500 cattle. And just learned that in 2024, they announced two more dairies just over the border in North Dakota. One will be 9,000 or no 10,500 or 9,500, and then another one will actually be 12,500. So big dairies, they've got a lot of manure, and they're going into regions where there's not typically as much dairy manure available. The other thing that's going on is a lot of these dairies are bringing new-ish manure tech. I say new kind of because it's new for dairies. It's been around for a long time, but this is a liquid solid separation system where the raw manure goes into these screw presses, and they have a whole line of them. And then the solids are actually recycled back into the barn as bedding. And some of the solids are then also land applied because they have more solids than they need. But this is a bit different than we're used to with a typical dairy manure. And why that might be is kind of thinking about the nitrogen cycle with our dairy manures. We have, well, with any kind of nitrogen cycling going on in the soil, you have three forms: organic nitrogen, ammonium nitrogen, and nitrate nitrogen. And plants are typically taking up ammonium and nitrate forms. There's some evidence that they might take up small molecules of organic nitrogen, but it's a very small amount compared to what they're taking up in ammonium and nitrate. But with dairy manure, we get organic nitrogen and ammonium typically. And this is any manures, you get these. But with dairy manure specifically, typically there's a lot more coming out in the organic fraction than the ammonium fraction. But with our liquid solid separation systems, we might be kind of changing that ratio a little bit. So this is what you typically might expect for that ratio. This graphic shows us the manure nitrogen distribution. The red or the darker part of the bars over there is in the organic nitrogen form. Typically, this is going to be ammonia because in most manures, there's not enough oxygen getting in there to form nitrate. And then the organic portion is in the yellow bar. I do have the percentages listed there for the inorganic portion. And then I separated it into liquid and solid, and then liquid it's swine, dairy, beef, and solid it's swine, dairy, beef, and poultry. And you can see right away that there's a difference between liquids and solids. With our liquids, we're at least 50-50 inorganic versus organic. With our swine manure, it's a lot more, 75% or higher, maybe even, I've seen some 80 to 90% ammonium. So these are going to be much more fast release. With our dairy manures and beef manure, it's about 50-50. And then when you move into our solids, our poultry actually has the highest percent at 26%. And all the rest are much lower than that. And this is kind of interesting because I have everything from 0 to 100% here. But one of the things I like to point out is that poultry, even though it's 26%, it's still a lot of ammonium because poultry litter just has so much nitrogen in it. One of the first research projects we did, we were digging around in poultry litter for our experiments, and there's these like white clouds coming up from it. It's like, oh, it must be cold out. It's steam. And then I accidentally got a whiff and burned out all my nose hairs. It was like almost straight ammonia. So do know that there's still just that much more ammonia or that much more nitrogen in the organic fraction too. So how does liquid solid separation maybe change that nutrient or that nitrogen? So here we have, this is two dairies that we worked with in this study, the Lauriston dairy, which is more kind of central Minnesota, and the Campbell dairy, which is getting closer up to northwestern Minnesota. The nitrogen, I have the inorganic fraction in the red and then the organic fraction in the yellow there. And then just in case you're interested, how much P2O5 and K2O is in the manure. So this is after the solid or after the liquids have been separated out. And for both of them, you can see that it's a little bit higher than what we would expect typically in a raw dairy liquid, particularly at Lauriston, which had been under operation for a lot longer. It was about 64% inorganic N, and Campbell, which was much newer, was closer to 57% inorganic nitrogen. So take home messages with these. One, if you're using this stuff, getting this dairy manure incorporated is going to be more important than even more of a raw dairy manure if you are trying to get the best bang for your buck from the nitrogen value. Because the ammonium concentration is a bit higher, that means if you leave it on the surface, you're going to lose some of that nitrogen more rapidly because the ammonia can volatilize. And to know that even in our solid manures, you might have higher ammonium concentrations than you would expect from a solid manure. So this is the solids coming out of the solid separation system. This is just one dairy. This is not the solids from the dairies that we worked with, but this is just a different, smaller dairy that we worked with in southern Minnesota. This is the solids. The nitrogen was still about 39% inorganic nitrogen of the total N, which is a lot higher. Remember, we saw mostly less than 20% for most of the solid manures. So definitely know that that's something that's happening. Our P concentrations are going to be a little bit lower in our liquid separated manure because some of the phosphorus goes with the solids. And our K concentrations, potassium's about the same actually. That's kind of usually typically in a liquid form in these dairy manures. So they kind of equally go with both sides. So why does this matter for sugar beet? So sugar beet takes up significant soil nitrogen early in the growing season, but you do not want to have high soil nitrogen later in the growing season for sugar beet because that actually hinders the sugar production. It's because the nitrogen goes into the like top growth production, the vegetative production, rather than the sugar. So that's why you want to make sure there's low soil nitrogen later in the season. But with manure, which is the gift that keeps on giving all season long, the question is, would that hamper sugar production? So is it better, like where in the rotation, if we have so much manure in this region, where in that rotation should we be applying the manure? Is it fine to put it in front of sugar beet? Should we put it in front of corn? And then because we're scientists, we're like, sure, let's just try it in front of soybean too. Why not? So here's our study. We had two locations up kind of near Nashua, Minnesota, and kind of near Murdoch, Minnesota. And then again, here's the liquid separation, kind of what the solids look like coming out of that. We decided that it was easier to apply manure one time and have all three crops at that same time planted, and then we rotated through the three different crops. So we have corn, soybean, and sugar beet planted all 3 years. So you can kind of see our different blocks of the different crops. And we have 4 replications at each site. And then we actually ran this for 6 years where we applied manure before the first year and then before the 4th year. So here's our first year. And yes, this is a very complicated system for applying manure, but we were doing smaller plots, so we had to apply it by hand. Luckily, we didn't have to do this with buckets. I did that one year, and that was awful. My staff will also tell you. So this is what we did. So these dairies are typically offering 2 application rates. One is roughly supplying about 195 pounds of nitrogen, first year available nitrogen. So that would be for a continuous corn system. The other rate they're offering is a low rate that's offering about 150 pounds of nitrogen, that first year plant available nitrogen. So that's more if you're doing corn following soybeans. Some of the dairies are offering a middle rate in there as well, but this is kind of like because they're dealing with so much manure, they just want to get through working with their customers. Like these are the rates that we're offering. So the high rate for both of our sites was roughly about 15,000 gallons per acre. We did use their fall tests from the dairy to kind of calculate what the application rate would be. The low rate roughly was about 10,000 gallons per acre, and it was a little bit different at each site just due to the differences in the nutrient management of that barn. But this is roughly about what it was. And then we compared that to just a spring typical fertilizer. So high rate was applied on corn. It was applied before the sugar beet. It was applied before the soybeans at all of these rates. And then the spring fertilizer was applied based on the crop recommendation. So if it was corn, we applied the nitrogen at the corn recommended rate. Soybean, we didn't apply nitrogen. And for sugar beet, we did the soil test that they recommend and then applied based on that. And then for the low rate, if that was lower nitrogen than needed for the crop, we did add additional fertilizer nitrogen too. So this is kind of a systems approach where we're making sure there's full nitrogen, full phosphorus, full potassium for the crop. And then there might be over applications depending on what we're applying in manure, but we moved on from there. Our second and third year, we did not apply any additional fertilizer, but we did apply nutrients based on the soil tests or the recommendations. So we took the nitrogen credits for the manure for the second year and then subtracted that out from the fertilizer guidelines. And then in years 4 through 6, we did this again. These sites had not had a manure history. So the idea was like, if there's repeated application of manure, would that cause even more differences in the sugar beet production? And yes, it looks like I'm just taking a selfie, but I was actually on the business end of that hose. I was the one reaching in and grabbing the samples. So don't worry, I was getting covered in manure too. So then we basically just repeated the study again for those kind of second set of 3 years. So here I have just a lot of data, but I'm going to try to break it down. This is the corn yield for the first 5 years at both sites. So there's corn yield in bushels per acre. And then you can see I have a little poop emoji there when we applied the manure, just to remind you. So before the first year and before the fourth year or the first repeated year of manure application. Then above each graphic, there's some letters. The letters only go with that specific grouping. So for each year. Then I have the red is the fertilizer only. The yellow middle bar there is the manure low rate for that year. And then the gray bar is the manure high rate. And again, we did not apply manure in the second or third year, but we did apply additional fertilizer if needed. So overall, it looks pretty good. We generally did not see any differences in any of the treatments except for the second year where both of the manure applied treatments, so that residual second year. We did see significantly higher yields than where we had spring fertilizer only. And then that pattern kind of followed numerically through the next couple of years. But by our second year of repeated application, we did not see any statistical difference again. We did see a significant, or it wasn't significant. I haven't actually done the analyses yet for this last one because we just got the yield data in for the one site. But we did see a numerical decrease in yield in that particular year, which was 2024 for one site and 2025 for the second site. So we will see as we get more of our data in this fall, kind of why we think that happened. Soybean was a bit of a different story. I kind of joke sometimes that we do dumb things you don't have to in science. This is maybe one of the dumb things that we did. So this is our soybeans yields for Murdoch 2020, Nashua 2021. And you can see that wherever we applied manure, we really, really decreased yield significantly. And visually, like you could see it to the line. Both of these sites have high pH soils, though it's much higher at the Murdoch site. We're talking 7.8 to 8 or so, versus at Nashua, it's more like 7.6 to 7.8. So a little bit lower, but still generally on the higher end. And because we started at the Murdoch site first and then moved to Nashua, we kind of learned our lesson and we applied a product to hopefully deal with some of the issues. We think this is mostly iron deficiency chlorosis issues. And typically you see higher rates of iron deficiency chlorosis where you have high nitrate in the soils, which Manure probably helped with that, and high organic matter, which again, Manure maybe helped increase that in those plots. So significant decreases in that. We also changed our variety from that first year, just something that was a little bit more resistant to IDC. Here's a photo of that. You can literally see like to the line exactly where we had our different Manure plots, unfortunately. So again, we do dumb things. You don't have to. Don't do that. Use a product if you are applying Manure on high pH soils right in front of soybean. Here's the soybean yields for the rest of the years, though we did not see nearly the problems that we had at that one site. And in fact, we didn't see any statistical differences, but numerically, where we had that history of that high Manure application, it was numerically a little bit better. And then even at our site where we had the issues that first year, you can see this is the first year after Manure was applied again. So our fourth year of the study. And here's our sugar beets. You don't see, or sorry, our soybeans. You don't see the issues, maybe had a planter issue, but we don't see the issues with IDCs that we did. We did see them the second year after the Manure had been applied that second time though. But that time it seemed to be more of just like there was just high IDC in the whole area, because in rep one, we actually had pretty decent soybean yields in stand. Maybe the low rate had some issues, but the high rate, or where there was a history of the high rate, it looked fine. And then in other reps, it looked like maybe it was more tied to Manure. But again, when you see differences in reps like that, it kind of suggests that it's like a soil issue and not necessarily like where the Manure history had been. So getting into the sweet stuff, the sugar beets, I'm going to talk about kind of three different aspects. First is just the straight root yield. So this is the tons per acre that were harvested. And again, it's set up just the same as all the other graphics. The red is the fertilizer, yellow is the Manure low rate, and gray is the Manure high rate. And again, we saw pretty much very similar patterns to what we saw with corn and soybeans. So mostly there was not statistical differences in most years, except for the second year where the high Manure rate had a higher tonnage. And in most cases, there was a numerical increase where we had that Manure history for sugar beet root yield. But what we want to know about is the extractable sugar, because that's what we're actually harvesting. So this is extractable sugar in pounds per acre. And that pretty much followed root yield. Statistically, we did not see many differences, except for that second year where we had the residual nitrogen or residual credit from the Manure. Again, we saw significantly higher extractable sugar per acre in the high Manure rate. But another thing that's really important is the purity of the sugar, because then especially some of the sugar beet co-ops pay differently based on the percent sugar or the sugar quality. So that's important too. And this was actually pretty surprising. We are expecting to see decreases in sugar purity based on where the Manure history was. And statistically, we didn't see any. Like maybe that first year you can see slight declines in sugar purity, but it's very, very small. So we are actually very happy to see this. It suggests that Manure can be put in front of sugar beet and it's not necessarily going to hinder yield, even when we get into our repeated applications. So lessons learned. Quick question. Yeah, so the question was what was the disease ratings? I don't have that in my memory right now, but it was rated by the co-ops, so I do have that data. Yeah, but I would have to pull it up and it's probably not organized yet, quite yet, but we do have it somewhere, so I'll be able to report on it at some point. All right, so lessons learned. If we're using this liquid separated dairy Manure and sugar beets, we found there's no major downfall to applying in the sugar beet rotation anywhere for the sugar beets. So that was actually pretty surprising. There appeared to be a positive effect on corn, even the third year after manure was applied. Again, we saw those kind of numerical differences, not necessarily statistical differences. We did have issues with IDC, iron deficiency chlorosis, in soybean when the manure was in rotation on high pH soils, particularly at that one location. But then kind of after that, we changed our variety, and we also added, I'm just completely forgetting the name of the product, but we added the product that helps chelate the iron for it. Yes, soy green, thank you. So we added soy green too those following years, and that all seemed to help, except for that one year where IDC was just kind of everywhere in that area. So with that said, I also want to kind of plug, we are starting an on-farm research program. And we're looking for cooperators. We're looking for basically people who would be interested in testing best management practices for us. So it could be rates. Perhaps you want to look at cover crops and manure integration. Maybe you want to look at getting one of those new manure sensors that John Deere has. We're open to a kind of a lot of different things. If you're willing to work with us and share data with us, we're willing to share data with you. Reach out. We have an on-farm research coordinator, Eduardo. He's up front here, so feel free to talk to him at lunch or afterwards if you are interested. This is kind of what we were thinking. There would be some sort of strip trial, so we don't want it to be too complicated. We're not asking for 5, 6, 7 treatments like sometimes we do as scientists. 1 or 2 treatments. That is something that you've been interested in maybe testing out anyways. That would be great to work with you. So definitely reach out to us if you're interested in doing that. So I should have lots of time, but I suspect that nobody minds getting done a little bit early for lunch. So we have time for questions. Oh, thanks to our funding sources, the Sugar Beet Research and Education Board paid for the first 3 years, and AFRIC is funding the project continuation. So thanks to them, and contact info if you have any questions or want to follow up on other research that we're doing too. So I should have plenty of time for questions, but we can also go to lunch. I don't
Have any
mind.
questions in the house here or online?
Oh, and I have to do this. Okay.
Okay.
Any measurements of N losses for each of the treatments? So this study, we did not look at like leaching. We did residual soil nitrogen down to 4 feet in most cases. So we'll have that data. We did not do any ammonia losses or anything like that. So we didn't do like a nutrient budget for this study. Any other questions? Go ahead. Sure. So the question was, this was for dairy manure that's doing the liquid solid separation. Are there swine manure systems that are doing it? Typically not. Our dairy manures that we're treating as liquids or handling as liquids are usually 8 to 10, maybe up to 12% solids. So that's one of the reasons why they're trying to take some of the solids out. And then they're also able to recycle that into the barn and use as bedding instead of having to purchase sand and stuff. So economically, that's one of the reasons why they're doing that. They actually do have like a slight increased risk of mastitis in the barns when they do this, but the treatment for that is cost less than buying the sand. So overall, economically, it makes sense for our dairy barns to do this. With our swine barns, they're typically not doing any kind of bedding, so there's not necessarily a reason for them to want to separate out the solids. But also, they're more like 1%, 2% solids. So economically, it'd be doing a lot of filtration for not a lot of solids. And in that case, like a lot of that's already ammonia, so it would be even more ammonia. So yeah, I don't think there's many barns doing it. I know we had some at our research center looking at it, and perhaps as we start doing, well, as fertilizer prices come up and we start looking at recovery of nutrients from manure as an option, maybe you'll start to see those things. But right now, I haven't seen it commercially done too often.
Other questions? I have one. Do you have any idea what % of the sugar beet acres are on manured fields?
The question was, and do I have to repeat it since you had the microphone? Okay. What kind of percentage of, no, I don't know what percentage of manured fields are in the sugar beet production region. And I think it changes, but also some of these dairies have really just come online. So we're still trying to get a handle on all of that. It's a good question, though.
All right, let's give her a hand. Thank you.